Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy. We're in Deuteronomy chapter 5. And in this chapter, Moses gives again to the children of Israel the 10 commandments. Now, this is the second time in the Bible that we find a recitation of the 10 commandments. The first, of course, is in Exodus chapter 20 at Mount Sinai. After the Israelites had been delivered out of slavery in Egypt, God brought them to the mountain of God, Mount Sinai. There they entered into covenant with God. And the foundation of the covenant is the 10 commandments. Now it's 40 years later. The children of Israel are on the east banks of the Jordan River. They're preparing to cross the river and take possession of the promised land. The wilderness wanderings are over. And as we've seen, the entire book of Deuteronomy is a renewal of the covenant, a renewal of what they did at Mount Sinai 40 years ago. And so, of course, once again, Moses gives to them the 10 commandments, the foundation of covenant with God. Now, obviously, as we read through the rest of Deuteronomy, there's going to be other laws that God gives. But the 10 commandments are the foundation, and all the other laws flow out of them. They are particular applications of the 10 commandments to everyday life. But the 10 commandments form the foundation stone of the covenant with God. Now, in Deuteronomy chapter 5, they begin in verse 6. And it begins with this statement: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. Now notice the 10 commandments, they do not begin with the first commandment. They begin with this prologue, this statement of what God has done for the people. I am your God. I redeemed you. I brought you out of slavery in Egypt. Notice it says two things there. All the commands God gives to us are based on the fact that he has first redeemed us. He has first saved us. And as a saved people, the commandments become the instruction by which we should live. You see, it was never true, neither in the New Testament or the Old Testament, it was never true that we tried to save ourselves by keeping the law. Salvation is always by the grace of God. It is always by the hand of God. It is always by the activity of God. It is God who saves us. We do not save ourselves by keeping the law. So why is the law given? The law is given that we might know how a saved people ought to live. God is saying to the Israelites, I have saved you. I have redeemed you. I have brought you out of slavery. Now you're wondering how a saved, redeemed people ought to live. I'm giving you the law, not by keeping it you might save yourself, but I'm giving you the law so that you might know how a saved people ought to live. That's why the 10 Commandments begins with this statement: I am the Lord your God. I am the one who has saved you. I am the one who has brought you out of Egypt, out of slavery. Now, this is how my people ought to live. It's the same for us. You know, when we come to God, it's not based on what we do for ourselves, as if we, by good works, could save ourselves. We're his because he saved us by grace through faith. It's all by grace. But as a saved people, we're asking, how do we live? How do we redeemed people live for God? And he's given us his word and his commands to show us how a redeemed people ought to live. So the law has always been an instruction manual for a saved people. God has saved you by grace. Now then, how do you live? Well, let me give you the instructions. So, I am the Lord your God. I am the one who brought you out of slavery. Now, hear my words so you know how my people ought to live. But also, the second thing, notice he said, I am the Lord. I am your God. Now, why does it say that twice? Well, if you look carefully in your English Bibles, the word Lord is in all capital letters. Now, in English translations, what that means is when you see in the Old Testament the word Lord in all capital letters, this is the personal name of God. You remember Moses, when he first met God at the burning bush, he asked, what is your name? And God said, I am who I am. Well, that phrase comes across as Lord. And the English Bibles translate it in all capital letters. So when you read it and you see in all capitals of Lord, you know this is the personal name of God. And so God is saying, this is my name. I'm the Lord. I am who I am. I am your God. I have saved you. Now that's important because as Israel looks around, they're going to see that other peoples around them have other gods they worship. The Egyptians had a bunch of false gods they worship. They remember that. And as they go into Canaan, these Canaanite peoples worship other gods as well. Gods like Baal. But there are others as well. They were the gods of those people, the gods they worship. But the Lord is saying to Israel, I am the Lord. I am who I am. I am your God. Not these others that the Canaanites worship. You won't worship them. I am the Lord who saved you. I alone am your God. And so God says to us, I am your God. I've saved you. I've redeemed you. You shall worship only me. And so the Ten Commandments begin through this prologue, reminding us that God is God. There is no other. And he is the one who has saved us. And as a saved, redeemed people, here is how we ought to live. In our next session, we'll start looking at the commandments specifically. But remember, these are instructions for how a saved, redeemed people, redeemed by the grace of God, this is how we ought to live. These are the instructions given to us for a redeemed people. Join us tomorrow as we continue our 5-minute Bible study in the book of Deuteronomy.